Welcome to It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach with your host, Sister A. Legree. You can find out more about us by logging onto our website at igbatt.com. Again, this It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. And I wanted to talk today about when to get help. And I'm hoping that this is working for me here. Trying something a little new here. When to get help. Let me see if it goes down here. Um, just want to make sure you can see it. Okay, looks like you can. So, okay, when to get help. And I'm going to read from this and then I'm going to talk as well. So, again, it's getting better all the time. Mental health outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. Log on to our website at igbatt.com. And before I forget, this is November the 2nd. In January, we're going to be doing some, for people who live in the Washington D.C. area, we're going to be putting some boxes together for the holidays. So email us at igbatt1.aol.com for more information. But again, wanted to talk about when to get help, okay? And this is from our little booklet that we have here that we put together. But when to get help. If you are experiencing changes in your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are negatively impacting your life, then it might be time to talk to someone. Remember, the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are connected. When we're talking about mental illnesses, whether we're a serious illness or non, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to some degree are connected. So when you start finding yourself experiencing you're sleeping too much, sleeping too little, your mood has changed, you become more irritable, you're eating more, any changes in your thoughts, feelings, or behaviors that are negatively impacting your life, you may want to pay attention to that and talk to someone, right? Getting help for a mental health concern can happen anytime you are ready. When you go to get help, where you go to get help or how you get help will vary depending on where you live at. But right now, if you live in the United States, and even if you're not, but you have access to a phone, you can contact 9888 and you can also get help. I shared earlier in another broadcast about SAMHSA. You can log on to their website and then you're also able to get information there as well. But 988, you can reach out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you can get help if you need to talk to someone, okay? But getting help for someone else, depending on where you live and the symptoms of that in your loved one, it varies, right? So there's no I'm not going to say there's no one way to do it because it depends on where you live. So, depending on where you live, symptoms, and previous history, you may choose to contact your local crisis team or 911. Keep in mind, a lot of jurisdictions do not have a crisis team or, they don't have a crisis team. So, let me see. Hopefully, everybody can see this because it's kind of, let me see if I can blow it up a little bit. I'm just talking. Okay, okay, that looks like a little better. A little better. Okay. So hopefully people can see it. Okay. Let me see if I can move this out of the way and make it a little better for people. Okay, let me see. Okay, let me see. Hopefully this is a little better for everyone that you can see it. Uh, Okay, so depending on where you live, like I said, symptoms and previous history, you may choose to contact your local crisis team. Every place doesn't have a crisis team, so you might have to think about 911. But a crisis team consists of a group of mental health professionals who will, once you call, respond to you at your location. The crisis team can help navigate you through the mental health services in your area, triage symptoms, arrange a follow up appointment, and assist you in getting appropriate help. The crisis team, after assessing your situation, can sometimes help to defray an inpatient hospital stay, encourage medication use, and stabilize symptoms until a clinical provider can see your loved one. Sometimes, however, the crisis team may decide that an inpatient stay is needed. If they do, They will help to arrange transportation to the hospital. But please understand that even if the crisis team feels that your loved one should be admitted, the doctor at the hospital may not agree. So what am I saying here? So again, let's just say you have a crisis team in your area. You call the crisis team comes out. And if you're not sure if you have one, again, you have to assess the situation. If it's an emergency and you feel like you need to call 911, then that's what you should do. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. But if you're not really sure, you can call 988 and get some support. But if your area has a local crisis team, you want to make sure you have that number. Here's the thing. If you are living with someone who have a serious and persistent mental illness, as I shared before, serious and persistent mental illnesses, you can anticipate a relapse. You can anticipate increases or changes in symptoms. You can anticipate any type of a change because we're talking about an illness that has to be managed, and because it's an illness that has to be managed, you should be prepared. You want to be prepared. You don't want to be taken off guard. So if you are living with the symptoms of depression, schizophrenia, or bipolar, and you know that gets your symptoms get very severe, you want to have that crisis team number. If you are living with a loved one and you know their symptoms get severe or they have serious and persistent mental illnesses, you want to have this information pasted somewhere, the number to the crisis team. Ideally, you should also have the number to their treatment team if they're connected to a treatment provider. That's ideally should be the number one thing that you do, but just say you don't. So you call the crisis team. The crisis team will, they'll ask you questions. They let's just say they come out. They come out to the situation and they will talk to your loved one. They will talk to you. They will kind of assess to see, okay, what's going on. If it's an issue, if they have medications, or if you have medication, you're not taking them, they can help you, but they can just assess the situation. I can tell you, crisis teams are not magic. They're not music. What do you call it? Magical. I went out on a call one time, and we got there, and the lady, the landlord had called us. We went out there, but the lady, she wasn't she didn't require inpatient hospitalization, right? And we couldn't make her do the things that the landlord wanted us to do. So it was one of these things where when the crisis team comes out, they're not necessarily magic. We can't make a person do something that they're not willing to do. Also, keep in mind, just because your loved one or you are not taking medications, does that in itself may not require an inpatient hospital stay. Just because they're responding to internal stimuli because they're yelling, they're doing things that's bizarre to you. That in itself may not be good enough for an inpatient psychiatric stay. So in cases like that, if you have a crisis team, the crisis team can be really helpful because they can come out, they can advise, they can talk to your loved one, they can assess. They may not recommend your loved one going in, but they can come out, help, support you, and guide you in what to do. Again, people have a right not to take their medication, just like you have a right not to take your medications. Individuals, to include your loved one, they have a right to sleep in, sleep all day, whatever it is, long as they're not bothering anyone. The key, though, is are their symptoms negatively impacting? You have to ask yourself, okay, I'm calling the crisis team because my loved one is not taking medications. The question would be, how is them not taking medications negatively impacting them, right? How is this behavior, whatever the behavior is, negatively impacting your loved one? And once that's what you want to focus on. You don't want to just say he's not taking his medications. So what? He's not taking his medications. If he's not taking his medications, is that causing an increase in symptoms? If so, what are the symptoms and in what way? So you got to think out the box because a lot of times people will get caught up into, are they a danger to themselves or others? Well, if a person is diabetic and they're not taking their medications and their insulin level, gets really low or too high, then that can be, yes, that's a danger to themselves. If they are not taking your medications or you're not taking medications and they're yelling, screaming, and um, saying negative things to people out in the community who could eventually hurt them, then yeah, they could wind up being hurt. So again, just kind of keep that in mind. I don't want to kind of go on and on too much with that, but the crisis team will come out, evaluate. see what's going on. Okay. Sometimes the crisis team will agree that we need to have an inpatient stay. Now, depending on where you live, all right, the crisis team may be able to go ahead and say, every state is going to require paperwork, right? Whatever it's called, whatever your jurisdiction, whether it's an FD12, some places an EP, whatever it's called, emergency petition, whatever. Okay, the crisis team will complete to say, okay, we believe that there's a crisis in the moment, and we're taking this individual down to the hospital so they can be evaluated further by a doctor. Now, if your loved one, let's just say, decides to go voluntarily, great. If they choose not to go and they say, no, I don't want to go, but they need to go, the crisis team, depending on the makeup of the crisis team, depending on the state that you live in, will either have to do one or two things. They can transport against the person's will. Many times, I can tell you that is not the case. I don't but again, I'm not familiar with all of the states, so or jurisdictions. But 9 times out of 10, what will happen? The crisis team will have to call Will have to call the police because the police are the only ones that can make a person do something against their will. So the police will come out. And again, if this happens to you and the crisis team is there, the crisis team will explain to your loved one what's happening, what's going on. They will explain, hey, you're not in any trouble. The police just have to come out and try to help us, et cetera, et cetera. So again, how your loved one gets to the hospital or how you get to the hospital will vary depending on whether you're voluntarily, okay, yeah, I'll go, or you don't want to go, but we feel that you need to go. Okay. A crisis team can be an invaluable asset to you and your family, but there are times in which you may have to call the police as opposed to or before you call a crisis team. When deciding between calling the cops versus calling a crisis team, ask yourself these questions. Are there weapons involved? Is there actual violence or issues related to safety present? A crisis team consists of a group of mental health professionals, not necessarily police officers, okay? So again, certain areas, certain places that you go to, you may be able to what's happening here. You may be able to may consist of police officers, but many times that is not the case. Many times the crisis team consists of a group of mental health professionals. You may have a police officer every now and then. Again, that's I don't know any places that do that, but I'm sure they do. But you have access to call the police will come out. A lot of times, when the crisis team is called, depending on what you say on the phone, the report that you give, the crisis team will call the police, and the police will come along with the crisis team or so it depends on what you say. But if it's an issue where you know is related to violence, if it's an issue where weapons are involved, then you want to just go out and call the police because the crisis team, when they ask you these questions about weapons, et cetera, they're going to just call the police anyway. So again, just kind of keep in mind. But I think it's important to know, and let me something is going on here is that even if, let's say, the crisis team or the police determine that your loved one needs to go to the hospital, and let's just say they get to the hospital, there's no guarantee that they're going to stay there. Because once they get there, it's really up to um, the doctor there to say whether your loved one, and I just want to kind of go through here. Okay, it's not working. No problem. It's up to the doctor to say whether your loved one whether your loved one will be admitted or not. So what happens is, let's just say now they're at the hospital. Now that they're at the hospital, the doctor or a mental health technician or clinician will assess your loved one. Once they assess your loved one, they will decide, okay, should he or she be admitted? Many times they may not decide to admit. And I point that out because this is where you may have to advocate either for yourself or for your loved one, depending on the situation. You may have to say, if you can, you want to go along with your loved one to the hospital. If you can't, you want to have be talking to them on the phone. Many times they're going to call you, but you want to talk to them on the phone and you want to explain why you called, why you feel that they need to be admitted into the hospital. Because a lot of things can change. The doctor may decide, okay, this person has a your loved one has a primary care doctor has a mental health team. Let's connect the person with the mental health team. They may call them up while they're in the hospital, and while they're there, they may make some changes to the medications and send your loved one or you back home. Or they may decide, okay, let's give them some medications here, let's keep them for a few hours, and then we'll send them back home. Again, there's no guarantee that the doctor is going to agree with you and say we need to admit them. So that's why it's so important for you. Okay, if it's really important to you that you're there. It's really important that you advocate that you're there and you explain to the doctor, okay, what's going on? Why do I feel that my loved one needs to be admitted? Why do I think he or she needs to? I'm sorry, I'm just going to bring this back. Why do I think they need to be admitted, right? What are you seeing? And again, as I said before, I don't know if I said it in this broadcast, it's not necessarily about, one moment, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to bring this back up again. It's not necessarily about, um, trying to find new technology here, I'm sorry. It's not necessarily about the fact that they're not taking their medications. It's not necessarily about the fact that they're not sleep, whatever it is that you think. You want to ask yourself, what, again, remember I told you that question that you want to ask yourself. Why is it, I'm going to bring this back up. Why is it that you feel that your loved one needs to go to be admitted? Okay? Again, it can't just be because you feel like they should be admitted into the hospital, right? It needs to be a reason. Okay, let me see if I can share my screen with you. Okay. Um, as I said, once at the hospital, the decision to involuntarily commit your loved one is up to the doctor. Again, just like the police, doctors do not like to make the decision to hold a person against their will lightly. They don't take it lightly. While almost all states allow police and clinicians to initiate short term commitment lasting up to 72 hours to handle imminent emergencies, there are legal statutes that must be met to hold a person against their will longer than that. Okay? So again, what am I saying? What I'm saying is that your loved one, once they get to the hospital, if you feel that they need to be admitted, you may need to be prepared to advocate. Right? You're gonna have to be able to say why. Okay, why do you think? And it can't just be because they're not taking their medication. So what? As I said before. And I harp on that because a lot of people mistakenly think that's enough, and many times that's not the case. So again, let's just say your loved one now is admitted into the let's just say the doctor decides to admit your loved one, or you decide to, you're admitted. Once you're admitted, it's not like back in the day, 50 years ago, where people could stay indefinitely. The plan is to stabilize, the- to safely stabilize, get your person back on their medications, get you stable, and get you out of the hospital back into the community. That's important to remember because a lot of times, a lot of family members or yourself might think your loved one may be gone for a long period of time, and that may not be the case. So again, if there are some concerns that you have, you want to be there at the hospital. You want to be there. You want to know who the attending doctor is. You want to know who the resident doctor is. You want to know, you want to be there because the clinical social worker. You want to be there to figure out what's going on with your loved one and to advocate for them. What's most important is while you're at the hospital, whether it's you or your loved one, you want to ensure that you leave the hospital with a good discharge plan. What does that include? You need to have an appointment made for you. You don't want to just leave the hospital with a phone number and saying, "Okay, call when you get there, whenever you feel like it." No, they should ensure that you have a date, a phone number, an address of your next appointment. Number one. Two, you want to be able to know what's going on with your medications, right? Are they going to give you a prescription, which many times they do? Are they going to give you some medications? Whatever it is, you want to know what the next steps are. What's the next step for your medications? Okay, so you want to make sure while you're in the hospital, because to me, being in the hospital is like the first step. No matter what happens, being in the hospital is like starting all over again. Because now you're in the hospital, you're stabilized, you got your discharge planning, you have your appointments, you're connected to resources out in the community. So now that you're out of the hospital, it's important that you follow up, right? Following up with your treatment team, your outpatient providers can decrease the number of relapses that you have or crises that you have. It can decrease the number of times that you'll have to call the crisis team or the police to come out to your home because either you or your loved one are not feeling well. Okay, so because when you're connected to a crisis team, not a crisis team, a outpatient mental health clinic, you have a community, right? It's not just the psychiatrist, it's the clinician, it's the case manager. It's a whole team that you're connected to. You other peer supports, people who are living with serious and persistent mental illnesses or illnesses just like you are or your loved one are. So you have a team. So it's important for you and your loved one to ensure that you follow up with your outpatient providers. Once you're there, if you're the loved one, try to go. That's the one of the most important appointments that you can make is going with your loved one to the appointment for the first time after that hospital visit. Because while you're there, you're able to ensure that when your loved one is filling out the paperwork, your name is on the paperwork. They have uh, 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 they're able to call you. You sign the authorization to release of information which allows you and the providers to talk freely. Okay, you're there. You're able to ask questions. You're able to you know, share your input, talk about any concerns that you might have as well for that first time. And you don't have to take over the entire session, but you want to do that for at least for a little, first few minutes and hey, explain to them because you want the treatment team to know that hey, I'm here. If anything happens, this is my face. I'm concerned about my loved one. Why is that important? It's important so as time goes on, and if something begins to happen, because I remember, as I said, serious and persistent mental illnesses is not uncommon to have relapses. It's not uncommon to have changes in diagnosis or changes in symptoms, especially during stressful times. So you may find yourself as the loved one, as a family member, friend, or whatever, may having questions. But if you're there and they know who you are, the treatment team knows who you are, you can pick up the phone. You can say, "Hey, this is what I'm noticing about my loved one. What should I do?" Someone, instead of the crisis team, someone from the clinic may come by. Someone from the clinic may reach out to your loved one. But again, living with a serious and persistent mental illness is an illness that has to be managed, right? You have to plan. You have to know that relapses are possible or more than likely, right? So you have to plan. So part of your planning process is knowing who the treatment providers are, having those phone numbers, knowing the address, going there at least one time with your loved one so you can have they can know you, you can know them. You can most importantly filling out that release of information, right? Most importantly, so that way there won't be any HIPAA challenges or any problems later on. Okay, so again, you want to do that. So as I said, if you have to call for a crisis, and you have to be admitted voluntarily, you can call the crisis team if you have one in your area. If not, you may have to call, or you can talk to your loved one, see if they'll go in voluntarily, or you may have to call 911. If you call 911, make sure you let them know that it's not an emergency. I mean, it's not right. That is your loved one is not a danger to him or herself unless they are. Um, if you have to call the police and you police show up, you want to meet the police, okay? So again, what does that look like? You call 911 to say the police come out. You want to be the first one that the police see. And when you meet the police, you don't want to be overly and I know you can be anxious and all that stuff, but you don't want to be overly anxious as much as possible because remember, the police don't know your loved one. So if you meet the police with, oh my God, I don't know, he's doing this, she's doing that, okay, that's going to put the police automatically up on edge. But if you go to them and say, hey, yeah, yeah, I'm the one who called my loved one, he's diagnosed with schizophrenia, whatever. He hasn't been taking his medications. He's not taking his medications, and his insulin levels are really falling really low, or he's been yelling and screaming, and I'm wanting some help to get him to the hospital. He's not a danger or anything like that. There are no weapons or anything like that. So again, you're talking to the police, you're calming them down, and you're walking with the police to your loved one if possible, and say, hey, remember, Johnny, okay, these are the officers that I told you about. They're going to be here to show us what to do. Because before you call the police for your loved one, you want to let them know what you're doing. You want to say, hey, you know what? I think what we're going to do, I'm going to either call the crisis team, we're going to call the police, just so they can help us, because I think you might need to get some help. There's no need to surprise them. You want to let your loved one know. They may say, no, I don't want to call the police, blah, 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 blah. And you let them know, hey, well, you're not taking your medications, you're doing this, you're not sleeping. And so what do you want me to do? Have a conversation with them. So again, if you have to call the police, let your loved one know you're going to call the police. Explain that they're there to help, not to because they're in any trouble. If the police show up, you want to meet the police, explain to them calmly what's happening. You want to walk with the police with to your loved one and explain, kind of what's going on there. You want to kind of, explain what's going on there. You want to try to be calm. You don't want to try to, you know, um, oh my God, type thing. You don't want to do that because that's going to put the police on edge because they don't know your loved one. Okay. Um, More importantly, once your loved one is at the hospital and they've been admitted, you want to make sure you're in contact with the treatment team. Two, you want to make sure they have a outpatient appointment, that they have their medications. You want to make sure you go to the first outpatient appointment because that's the first step. That you get phone numbers, that you know people there at the clinic. Because again, the more connected everyone is to the outpatient clinic, the less time you'll have to call the police or you'll have to call the crisis team. I always say that anytime we have to call the police for a mental health crisis, then that's a failure. Something went wrong. There's a failure in the system. We should not have to call the police for a mental health crisis if our loved one is living with us and they're connected to their outpatient provider. So again, this has been It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. You can find out more about us by logging on to our website at igbatt.com. Again, I hope we said something that was helpful. Um, Trying something new here with our technology, so we'll get it together. But again, igbattmho.com, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. You can email us at support at igbattmho.com.